What's going on, guys? My name is Tony and today I'll tell you everything you need to know before getting Code Vein, spoiler free. Code Vein is an action RPG developed by Shift and Bandai Namco Studios and published by Bandai Namco Entertainment, released for PC, PS4 and Xbox One. Code Vein is a new IP created by Bandai focusing on the popularity of the Souls-like genre to generate interest in this new world full of mysteries, vampires and blood trees. Here you hear the opinion of someone who likes the three main Souls games but is not a fanatic of the genre, so I hope to give you a view with little bias as possible. The game is set in the near future, where a great cataclysm has hit the Earth, where the general population does not know why or how it began. The Revenant Vampire-like creatures were created by scientists from dead humans to fight the calamity, using parasites that attaches themselves to the victim's heart, so when a Revenant dies they will resurrect after a while, unless its heart is destroyed. The price is that now you have to feed on human blood to avoid become a horrid creature. You wake up in the ruins of a city, accompanied only by a girl dressed in a quite revealing white nightgown, leading you to a spring, a plant that upon contact with your blood begins to produce blood beads, ampoules with fluid identical to human blood, something that the revenants eat, thus not needing to feed on human blood anymore. Soon you are captured and thrown into a ditch, where you discover that the city is enclosed by an impassable barrier made of red mist, and the whole city is full of miasma after the death of the Queen of the Revenants, which causes bloodlust and quickly makes you frenzy. If you lose yourself like that, you become a lost, a wild creature with no trace of humanity. The situation is even worse because all the springs are drying up, not producing blood beads anymore, and the provisional government put a levy in place to charge blood beads from every revenant. So, with the scarcity of blood beads, the levy, and the remaining humans being protected by the government, chaos and animosity are in place, and that's why you were captured, to be forced to hunt blood beads in dangerous areas that your captors don't want to venture in. I have played the game entirely on PC, including the main campaign, some side quests, and a little bit of the New Game Plus as well. And despite having no major bugs or crashes, the game has some problems. The FPS drops a lot in certain areas, and through almost the whole experience, the game suffers from problems with frame pacing, making it look kinda janky. And even so, it's not a really big problem, and it probably won't stop you from having fun with the game, as it didn't stop me. I think the biggest mistake the team behind the game made was to sell and market as an indie-made Dark Souls, because despite having several elements of the franchise, everyone who comes only with these games in mind will be a little disappointed for sure. It's more of a Souls-light than a Souls-like, and what I mean by that is that despite having elements of the Souls franchise, the game is undoubtedly its own thing. But of course, in order to not waste time during the review, I will list some of the main similarities and difference between the titles, so as not to have to say different from Dark Souls or like in Dark Souls all the time, okay? Similarities. Every time you die, you go back to the last bonfire. I mean, missile you activated or rested on. Every time you die, you lose your souls that drop on the ground and can be recovered, but if you die in the path before getting them back, you lose them forever. Souls are used both to level up and to trade with various NPCs. Maps have a big influence too, with many different paths and shortcuts that you can open to make future journeys a lot easier. In the later levels, the devs decided that they had little Dark Souls in their game and set a lot of stupid traps. Differences. Combat is not as refined or slow as in Dark Souls, making the game seems a little easier because of the faster movement and combat you are capable of. The game has no secret room or illusion wall, or if it does, they are very well hidden. And while the maps themselves are influenced by Dark Souls, they are not connected to one another, failing to give that world feeling that the Souls franchise easily achieves. The game has a real narrative rather than relying on the idea of reading item descriptions or the Wikipedia. These are the main points that I can think of right now. That will probably stop me from comparing the two too much, but I'll still talk about some stuff later in the review, but this is the book that you need to know if you want to know how similar the two games are. I love RPGs and JRPGs, but I confess that I was a little scared of this title before I got to play it, because although I like similar games, imitators usually don't do that well. Luckily, as I said, they managed to do something very unique and not just bet on the similarities they have. Here you can run, dodge, parry, block, attack with your main weapon and use gifts. At the start of the game you have access only to 3 blood codes, which are the code veins classes: Caster, Fighter and Ranger. In other words, magic, melee and ranged, each with a different variety of gifts, abilities and spells that you can use in combat. But unlike other RPGs, here you don't have to choose your class before starting the game. You can change it freely at any time, even during combat, to better tackle some challenges your previous class wasn't getting through, or simply to test new gifts and different ways to play. During the game you will find several different blood codes which will give you various stats rates and gifts, so you can choose and use what makes you feel most comfortable. Gifts are initially bound to a specific class, but you can master them by equipping them and going to combat, so you can eventually use them in combination with any blood code of your choice that meets the minimum requirements for the gifts. To use gifts you need to spend Ichor, or mana if you will. The amount you have depends on the blood code you're using, with a more melee oriented classes having less and those that rely on magic having more. To recover Ichor you have to attack enemies with your weapons, use items or make use of a few selected skills. I played as a mage using several different blood codes that increased my willpower, which in turn increases the damage you deal with dark gifts. These spells are varied, very powerful and amazing to look at. Being a mage in here doesn't mean just being at range casting some pew pew pew. No, here you need to get into the fight to recover mana, unless you use a very specific build that allows you to stay away from the rumble. As weapons we have axes, hammers, big sword, one-handed swords, bayonets and spears. But I found that the variety within each category was lackluster. I used the same weapon for about 75% of the game. They are very well made and nice to look at, but a wider variety would not hurt the game. The same can be said of the armor or blood veils, and it is only one piece of equipment. Probably giving a wide range of looks and choice would be a very well liked addition for many players. You only have the one piece of equipment and most of the time you will be using the same thing for large portions of the game. You can also upgrade your equipment by using some items found during exploration, but they only increase stats. The appearance unfortunately is always the same. When you level up, you don't increase your stats individually, you really only increase, well, your level. Your stats changes according to the blood code you're using, which allows you the versatility to change classes anytime you want, but it takes away some of the sense of individuality, because every character will be the same if they are using the same class. It is not a real problem, but it takes a little bit of the much desired customization in RPGs. You can play the game completely alone, which would increase the challenge as there would be no assistant whatsoever. You can play with a partner NPC, which is the way the game was meant to be played, thus it was all over your face in the marketing and it was the way I played it. Or you can play in co-op through the internet, which I didn't test because, as you know, I have no friends. An important point to note, because I saw a lot of people frustrated with this, although at no time they said the game would have this feature, is there is no PvP, at least at launch, be warned. But it's worth saying that they did a really nice job with the companions. They help a lot in combat, clearly, but during exploration they make relevant comments about the things you do, the items you find, and sometimes even the enemies you encounter, making you feel like they are not just some shit NPCs following you. The game's customization is fantastic. You can make very detailed, Beautiful and incredibly unique characters here, from hairstyle and hair color to small and different types of accessories on your outfit. Best of all, you can change the look of your character after you start playing. Just go to the mirror at the main base and bam, you can change almost everything but the sex of your character. I made my beautiful red-haired waifu with different eye colors that kicked everyone's butts. The maps are well made and can give you a very cool feeling of lost civilization, but I think maybe a little more care for detail would make things a little more believable. I felt at some points that it wasn't a civilization that existed there before, but it was a developer who decided to stack things that way, which is always the case, but the illusion of being something that existed before is broken sometimes. But overall, the maps are pretty, with some being really amazing. As I mentioned before, most areas has several different paths that can be taken, many with shortcuts to make things simpler on a future visit or in an accidental death. But unfortunately, there is no connection between the maps. To go from one to another, you have to use the fast travel system, which leaves the world disconnected and loses some of the grandeur they try to pass. Another important thing to mention is that the game is extremely linear. You almost always face the bosses in much as the same order as everyone else, without much choices to do Y first then X, which makes the replay value a little smaller in my opinion. We have a large number of different and creative enemies in Code Vein, with each area adding in new enemies that later on will gain their variants according to the environment you are in. But it is interesting to note that most enemies, and bosses too, are distorted anime girls with huge breasts. It doesn't bother me, but I know there are a lot of people who have strong opinions about this kind of thing. Speaking of bosses, I didn't find the fights as rewarding as in other games in the genre, but that doesn't mean that the fights are bad, and besides that, the bosses are very creative and visually well executed, even with the quote-unquote problem with the big breasts and all that. There are two types of side quests in the game: the maps of the depths and missions given by irrelevant NPCs. NPCs appear near the missiles you activated after you kill the boss in the area, but most missions are pretty boring and disconnected from the main plot. Go to X, kill Y and come back, or get X things scattered on the map and give it to me. They give you experience and items, but it's not mandatory at all, and if you skip them, I don't think you'll be missing too much. The maps of the depths, on the other hand, are more interesting. They are small dungeons full of enemies, where you get plenty of material to upgrade your equipment, souls to level up, among other things. I recommend doing them whenever possible. It's kinda refreshing to play a Souls-like that doesn't rely on a half-abstract narrative to tell its story. In fact, quite the opposite. The game chose to go for a conventional narrative with multiple cutscenes and lots of dialogue, like every good JRPG. The way the game chose to tell the background story of the characters is also very interesting. During your explorations, you will find some fragments on the floor, and with the help of IO, you can relive lost memories of various characters in the game. These fragments exist because every time a Revenant dies and comes back, it loses a piece of memory, eventually losing itself completely. It's a nice interaction between story and gameplay. But the memory system could and should be refined if we happen to get a Code Vein 2, because you walk down slowly a dark corridor, listening to the memories and seeing still pictures of those moments, and every time you want to see a new memory, you need to talk to Io again, and often having to wait for a long animation for her to get ready. And to get things worse, there's loading screens between each memory. It gets tiring if you happen to have several fragments stored. Overall, this story is not bad, but as they needed to establish a world and still tell a compelling story, some things seem to have been rushed and some appear out of nowhere without much explanation, which makes you want to know more about the world they created and at the same time be like, what the hell? Why the hell? Who the hell? The game has more than one ending, with one of them being considered the true ending, thus adding a good amount of replay value. I really like the graphics of the game. Characters are clearly based on anime, but the level of detail and facial expressions they can give, even while wearing masks, is really cool. The detail of the clothing and accessories is very interesting as well. Combined with blood veils makes a cool post-apocalyptic atmosphere. All major NPCs are very unique, colorful, recognizable from afar, and with details that make them visually interesting. The maps, on the other hand, are a lot less colorful, making an interesting contrast between characters, enemies, and maps, making the action very clear and evident, yet they blend well enough, making a very beautiful canvas. Code Vein's soundtrack is amazing. A lot of the songs got stuck in my head, from the boss battle songs to some sadder and calmer ones during some of the cutscenes. I liked it so much that later I went after the OST to listen while editing or doing something else. I tip my hat to the game's music team. Great job. The sound design is pretty cool too, with the noise and impact of the weapons being very well done, the spells too registering the impact and elements of each one of them, immersing you more and more into the game. The English voices are good, with some lip sync issues, but there was no voice that I thought didn't match the character. But as it is a Japanese game, the characters have many quirks that the English voice actors don't follow, so if you have no problem reading the dialogues, or if you happen to know Japanese, I suggest playing Japanese to have a better experience. Although you choose a voice for your character at the beginning of the game, he doesn't speak during the cutscenes, only but one, even though the NPCs respond as if they were answered normally. You do speak during gameplay in some situations like "I failed you" when you die and things like that, creating a strange dissonance between story and gameplay. Liking Dark Souls won't immediately make you like Code Vein, but if you like Dark Souls and anime, you have a good chance of enjoying the game. It's a very solid game, my time with it was very well spent, at any moment thinking of stopping because I was bored. Some bosses can be frustrating at times, but nothing that a bit of try and error can't resolve. Code Vein does not try to reinvent the wheel, it takes what already works and applies it very capably, though failing in some points such as the game issues with performance and the frame pacing problem. I think it's a shame that the game was so heavily marketed to be an anime Dark Souls, because the game is so much more than that, and because of these comparisons and hopes, it got a lot of unfavorable reviews, which in my point of view it's kinda unfair, but I can understand it. The game talks a lot about friendship, ethics in the scientific world, vampires using magic, and of course, huge tits. I liked it, and if you think this is the game for you, give it a try and then tell me what you think. And that's it, this is my review of Code Vein. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it was useful to help you decide whether to play or not. So smash the like button because it helps the channel grow, subscribe for more reviews in the future, and in case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, and good night.